Hello emerging cricket fans and welcome to another episode of the podcast for this week. We've got loads to talk about from the ODI Super League and news from all around the world. But first, a shout out to those who support us on Patreon. From as little as $2 US a month as a patron, you can access bonus content at Emerging Cricket and have a say on our show's direction. A shout out to our newest patrons, Mikey Godsmark and our very own Jaron White. Thank you so much for joining the EC movement. To sign up, log on to Patreon. That's patreon.com/emergingcricket. But for now, enjoy this week's show. Hello and welcome to another Emerging Cricket podcast online and on Sport FM in Perth. I'm Daniel Bezic and with me this week, I am joined by the man known on Twitter as Copernicus Cricket, Nick Skinner. Nick, how are you?
I'm very well, Bez. I'm glad to have you back hosting. I was doing the filling in the previous episode, which nice to have you steering the ship once again.
It was honestly very good to go back and listen to it as a fan for once. I thoroughly enjoyed listening onto the Emerging Cricket podcast, just like so many other people around the world who do tune in. While sort of marooned in Melbourne, I was able to catch up on the rest of the Emerging Cricket action with yourself, Tim, and Nate Hayes, who joined in. And I've got to say, Nate's done a very good job. It's a tough act to follow again. We've given Tim the week off this week. He's been fighting tooth and nail for the emerging cricket movement. We decided to give him a night off and talk some cricket without him. Let's start. I suppose we can start in the UAE, and Ireland have played a fair bit of cricket in the area over the last couple of weeks. They were curtailed a bit by their series against the UAE, which was cut short by COVID-19, although those ODIs have been officially postponed and should be played hopefully at a later date. We haven't had much official word come out of that, but they did officially play their fourth one-day international, even though they missed the second and third. It was an Irish victory. They did manage to win that match by 112 runs. We'll get to their Super League series against Afghanistan in a few moments' time, which hasn't been as successful for the Irish. But coming back to, I suppose, level the series here and rip through the UAE side, again winning by 112 runs. A few notable individual performances with the bat: Harry Tector 33, Lorcan Tucker 42, Curtis Campher once again chiming in with the bat 56, and then Simi Singh had a day out, 54 not out of 57 balls. And, 5 for 10 off 10 overs, bowled 4 maidens, 52 dot balls in his spell, Nicholas. Quite remarkable. But just looking at say, this individual performance alone, quite a good one. Was meant to, I suppose, springboard them into a Super League series against Afghanistan. Unfortunately, they couldn't quite do that. But looking to this particular match, it was almost a complete performance.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best all-round performance I've seen for a while. Simi Singh, I'll admit to being a Simi Singh skeptic. I think he's doesn't do enough with the ball, and he's just been quite hittable throughout a lot of his career. But yeah, that game against UAE, he was unplayable. I don't know what was going on there, but 54 not out and a 5. Can't do much better than that. I was also pretty interested to see Kevin O'Brien trundling in, rolling the arm over with
came back
the old seamers, and he got rid of Rohan Mustafa, who was probably the UAE's last line of defence in that chase. But the Irish beat the UAE after losing the first game, but the issues that were going to sort of trouble them in the series against Afghanistan, you could see them already in that batting performance. No one really got going. There were some mediocre contributions, I guess, but they still needed to be bailed out. When Simi Singh scoring 54 is saving your hide in the innings, then I think that is a bit of an indictment of the top order, really.
Yeah, looking at that side, and we know that Curtis Campher's done well since he's come into the Irish team and into the setup, but you look at the top order, and if Paul Sterling doesn't make runs at the top at the moment, we're not too sure where those runs will come from. Even Andy Balbirnie will probably put his hand up over the past few games and acknowledge that his contribution probably hasn't been enough for the cause either. Just looking at some of the matches that we will talk about in a few moments' time, I don't think he made over 20 in the 3 ODI Super League matches against Afghanistan. But yes, Ireland took the belt back off UAE. Talked about it, you guys, in the last podcast, where if cricket was boxing, then the World Championship going, of course, from England, and then Ireland winning those one-day internationals against them, and then UAE, Ireland taking it back. But then to talk about the ODI Super League, and well, it was a pretty comprehensive performance by Afghanistan in all three of those matches. I know the first match was close. They only won that by 16 runs, but they came out, won the second one by 7 wickets with just under 5 overs remaining, and then a 36-run win in the third one-day international. And looking at some of the performances there, I think, first of all, we need to praise Ramanullah Gurbaz for his 127 opening the batting for Afghanistan. But to look at it from an Irish perspective, I suppose, it was a pretty disappointing performance in UAE, and a few things didn't go their way, and we'll talk about that. But overall, I think they'll be actually quite disappointed not to jag at least 10 points in that series, especially when some of the other teams around them have picked up points elsewhere, Nick.
Yeah, you say it's a comprehensive win, and yes, Afghanistan did win all 3 games, but yeah, each game there was a few moments or some opportunities for Ireland that they just didn't exploit, and Afghanistan played well in large stretches, but they were vulnerable. You look at the first game, even after Gurbaz's century, which was a magnificent innings on debut, 127. But they were 7 for 208 after 42 overs, and McBrien had helped the Irish fight back with 5 for 29, and there's no way they should be letting. They shouldn't be letting Afghanistan score another 80 runs after that. Obviously, Rashid, he's a handy slogger, but what are Ireland's bowlers doing? Why are they letting them get away with that? And then, the response, again, Camper, Lorcan and Tucker had a good innings, but then they just let them go, and they couldn't quite get there because they didn't have, they'd let Afghanistan put too much on the board. And then, the second and third games were sort of a bit of a carbon copy of each other, really. They had Paul Sterling coming in and smashing a century, and then nobody else really providing any support. The second one, there was a partnership with Camper again, but nobody else really kicked on. And again, they were 3 for 208 after 41 overs, which is a very strong position to be in, and they should have got a lot more than 259. Obviously, that second game where Ramat Shah got a century and Hashmatullah scored 82. That was a clinical performance from Afghanistan chasing it down. And the third one, again, Afghanistan 4 for 66, 5 for 117. They shouldn't get to 266. You can't keep getting mugged by Rashid Khan. And obviously Sterling realised he needed to score all the runs because he scored a ton and the run rate was going fine, but nobody else even got to 25. And once he was gone, they just crumbled. So yes, Rashid is an excellent bowler, and yes, Mujib bowling early on is tough to face. And I'm not saying Afghanistan played badly. I'm just saying that Afghanistan definitely had moments where Ireland could have exploited their weakness, but they just didn't have that. They don't have that cutting edge with the ball, and the batting is too fragile.
Yeah, and again, to look at it from an ODI Super League perspective, and just looking at some of the teams that have managed to jag points, the West Indies we've seen in Bangladesh field a pretty second-rate outfit. Bangladesh stealing points there. Zimbabwe beat Pakistan in a match there earlier on. And we look at somewhere like the Netherlands, who will have home series, hopefully in the not-too-distant future. And yeah, I suppose, Ireland beating England seems like a lifetime ago, not only with COVID and everything happening from that perspective, but yeah, to come out here, and I know the conditions here are very difficult, and I'm sure they're sick of Rashid Khan, because every time Rashid Khan comes on to bowl,
or bat,
he seems to just have a way with them, especially, and with the bat too. He came out and slogged them around. I suppose playing BBL cricket kind of helped him get his eye in almost for the ODI Super League, and Ireland unfortunately felt the wrath. But yeah, Paul Sterling, I think, he is becoming quite a complete player at the top of the order for Ireland, and he's 30 at the moment. He's still probably got 4 or 5 more good years of cricket left in him. He probably thinks he could probably churn out a few more years as well, especially looking at his opening partner, Kevin O'Brien, who unfortunately didn't have a great series here, but has been able to consistently, as a trend going through his career, pile on the runs when Ireland have needed him to. But I think the aspect that not many people talk about with Paul Sterling and his batting, despite being a top order player, he's got experience playing in the Middle East and in parts of Asia, and he plays spin a lot better than a lot of other players in this level of the game. I know we talk about associate cricket a lot, but even these two new full members, they're very much in that same sort of echelon. And Paul Sterling has come out and played excellently here. And as you go look through, the Irish lineup, if it wasn't for a few guys in the middle order there, they were in serious trouble of completely crumbling. And it got to the point where in the last match, we know that every single match counts for 10 points on the ODI Super League, but it did look as if Ireland wanted to ring the changes there. James McCollum came in for Kevin O'Brien, who struggled in the first 2 games, and Gareth Delaney was left out, which is, I think, again, if you looked back, 6 or 8 months ago when Ireland played England, Gareth Delaney probably would have been the first names on the team sheet. So not really sure what the end game is there. And we know that there is a long time in this World Cup Super League, in this ODI Super League for World Cup qualifying. But again, every game counts. And another thing that we need to be a little bit wary of are over rates and things like that. Teams will be penalised for a slow over rate. We don't know how much that will come into it. But remember looking at, say, Australia when they played India, and I know that particular ODI series wasn't part of that action, but if teams are going to carry on with over rates like that, we could see some interesting movements in and amongst that table. And again, all of these matches count. Again, we just have to cite those other ODI Super League series that have happened already. Afghanistan will feel like they're on the way to finding themselves being close to that top 8 if they've given themselves every chance moving forward. Another point you wanted to bring up, Nick, and I saw this when we sort of put our notes together for this week, was the decision-making, the umpiring, I think, is a topic of conversation that should probably be discussed at some point here. We thought that with this series being played on neutral territory, we'd probably just get neutral umpires anyway, but Afghanistan were able to field umpires, and a lot of the decisions, I suppose, didn't go Ireland's way, and I think all of them were reversed and the right decisions were made eventually with the technology available, but it's definitely food for thought.
Yeah, it's quite strange. Some unnamed Irish fans were very unhappy about this, likening it to the bad old days of touring Pakistan in the 80s or that kind of thing. But I don't know. It's strange because the ICC changed the rules to allow home umpires or umpires from one of the home teams to officiate, and that was a pretty reasonable call when it's so an English umpire who is already living in England. But it sort of seems like Afghanistan are bending the spirit of the rule in terms, because they're flying over Afghan umpires to officiate in a match when the whole point of having the home umpires was to reduce the need for flights in the middle of the pandemic. So yeah, it strikes me as quite weird that they're allowed to do that. And there's plenty of neutral umpires who reside in the UAE and could have officiated. So I don't really understand why that was allowed. Or, if that was going to happen, and if Afghanistan was allowed to fly in home umpires, why weren't Ireland allowed to fly in some home umpires to? I don't know. It's just quite strange situation to me. And yes, they had the DRS and they were able to overturn it. I think most of the bad calls, but yeah, it's not a good look.
It's not just the Super League too. We've seen some officiating in other parts of the world, in full member cricket too, where DRS and home umpires have definitely been questioned. And we know the world that we live in, and the circumstances are extenuating. So I think we do have to probably give, I suppose in cricketing terms, the benefit of the doubt to them. But it is, as difficult as the job is, you do have to wonder. There so many instances. I think we had a sample size big enough there to understand that there was a trend happening.
Yeah.
Again, I don't exactly know what the solution to all of that is. That's well and truly above my pay grade, and I'm sure that will be looked at under great scrutiny by those making those decisions. But I suppose looking to Afghanistan, there were multiple performers. I think the good thing about Afghanistan is that they play fantastic team cricket, and it wasn't just Gurbaz who made runs there. Ramit Shah also made runs in the series. Even, Askar Afghan at times chimed in. A lot of them put together some handy innings there. And then, as you said, Rashid Khan at the end in that innings when they posted 9 for 266. So I think that we've just seen, I suppose, the culmination of some great individual performances from Afghanistan, but in turn turning it into a great team performance. They definitely seem to be slightly at that next level of the international game. And And looking ahead to some of the series that they do have in the Super League, and you made a point about this, Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe, Bangladesh, and they even play, Pakistan, who, on their day, you don't really know what they're going to get out of them. So I think they haven't just turned a corner, Afghanistan. I think they would probably look at a lot of those series and say to themselves, look, all of these are quite winnable. Why can't they qualify automatically without going through the qualifier stage? So again, 30 vital points in the context of this whole campaign, and who knows, we might look to January 2021 as a point where Afghanistan really did, stamp a foot of authority on the entire competition, or at least, on the series and the qualification. So we will look at that with deep interest over the course of that campaign. And of course, we'll have a lot of that here at Emerging Cricket, especially from a Ireland, Afghanistan, and Netherlands point of view. One more point to bring up in terms of Ireland, and some somber news that did come out of there was the passing of Roy Torrens, an Ireland player from for over a decade and a half, from the late 60s to the 80s, was well involved in Irish cricket there for a long time. I saw a lot of stories on Twitter over the past week from a number of players from the Irish setup who had so many positive things to say about Roy and his work there. It definitely seems like he's left a hole and his own place in Irish cricket.
Yeah, and I saw a great post from Paul Sterling actually talking about how how much he loved Torrens, and how he'd been he was a team manager for a long time of the the Irish side, and he was sort of a bit of a mentor to a lot of the younger guys, and they all really looked up to him by all accounts. So yeah, and he dedicated his century to Torrens in the second game, and yeah, it seems like a great loss to Irish cricket. He won an OBE in 2009 for services to cricket, which that's not nothing, and a much lamented figure in the Irish cricket family. Before we move on from the Ireland series, it's a little bit off topic, but you sort of briefly mentioned it and moved on. But the points penalty for slow over rates, the way it's applied is kind of silly. Like, obviously, I mean, India has been penalised a point even though they auto qualify. That's you can't really help that. But the fact that it's a single point as a penalty, it's a bit strange, because obviously the first one is very important because it'll put you behind, but then the next few don't really matter until you get to maybe 5, because if you're getting 10 points for each victory, if you're on 10 points and then you're on 9 points, that's a huge difference. But if you're on 9 points, 8 points, 7 points, 6 points, that doesn't make any difference. So you can keep violating the over rates again and again until you get to like 5, which I'm sure there'll be some teams on with 5 point increments from washouts or whatever. So yeah, it basically gives them a free pass to waste time for the next couple of games.
Yeah, it was ridiculous, and I don't want to harp too much on full member cricket, because that's not while we're here together talking on a podcast. But Australia played an ODI series against India here, and the over rates were
they're abysmal. Yeah,
they were ridiculously bad. Crowds, TV networks, no one wants to go through that. So yeah, you kind of hope that the penalties were a little bit stricter, and I've never really seen a punishment that really suits it to a point where it deters anyone from doing it again. So that's my bugbear with international cricket at the moment, and we'll leave it at that.
No, yeah, I mean, fines for multimillionaire cricketers is kind of ridiculous. I did the maths on one of, I think Virat Kohli got a fine during the IPL that worked out to if you and I got that fine equivalent to our income, it would have been something like $5 or $10, because obviously he's a multimillionaire earning huge amounts of money every year. Getting a fine when you've got $20 million of endorsements every year seems kind of pointless. So I think here we go. We ask our guests what we'd change, and maybe one of the things I'd change is to have instead of fines or whatever for penalties for slow over rates, make it something that happens on the field. So I don't know, something like 10 runs per over that they miss, or something along those lines, where it'll actually start to really build up very quickly, and it won't be something you can just go, I'll just take the fine and take a tactical advantage.
Yeah, hopefully someone comes up with a solution to this soon. And again, we're all ears if you do manage to find something. But To move on and heading to the USA, and they've named a training squad for some of their national campaigns going forward. We saw the return of Ali Khan. Ali Khan once again named in that training group. We've seen him sort of maraud around the T20 leagues around the world. A champion in the CPL, got picked up by KKR in the IPL, didn't get a game, was also injured in that tournament, unfortunately. But yeah, the USA have named 44 players in that squad, and I won't put anyone through naming all 44 players, but there are a few players of note to definitely mention. Narsingh Deonaran, who was, of course, part of that West Indian test team many moons ago. He's been named. A lot of usual suspects, of course, from the USA national team over the past couple of years, but a few names to probably remind people of because the list is so big. Cameron Gannon, the Queensland fast bowler, has been named in the squad. Ganjanan Singh, who's from the West Indies, played in the CPL, is part of that squad too. Ian Holland's there, Josh Dascombe, Karan Viadia, who I think Peter Della Penna talked about him moving from Gujarat, I think. I think he played some age-level group cricket there. I think he played under 19s for India, and then he had a birth date issue, which came out sometime later. Rusty Taron is there again. Shayan Jahangir as well, who I think moved from Pakistan to relocate to Texas. There are so many players, and we've talked about USA's full member aspirations, but they're going to get a good look at a lot of these players all in one spot. We know that they're involved in Cricket World Cup League 2. They're on the course to try and make the qualifier for the 2023 World Cup and go beyond that. I look at this team and I wonder, one, how are they going to find the first 11 for this team, no matter what the format is? We saw that they were disappointing in the T20 World Cup qualifiers as well, no matter who turned out for them. Is it a case of too many cooks spoil the broth here, Nick? Because I feel like with 44 players, you're going to spend most of this training camp just working out who is going to be in a cut down squad.
Yeah, it does seem a bit strange to have such a big training squad. I guess, I mean, maybe they're going the way of having a sort of a bubble situation where they can have a lot of replacements to call on if need be, or something along those lines. Maybe I don't know, but yeah, some of the names are a bit
left field.
Yeah, I mean, Deonaran, I remember him playing in a series ages ago against Australia. I thought he batted quite well, but that was a long time ago. We also saw a great bit of trivia from emerging cricket contributor Mala Hathi. Deonaran took Tendulkar's wicket for the last time in Test cricket. Mala called him the modern Eric Hollies, in reference to the man who took Bradman's wicket for the last time. So that's some good trivia. But it is something that bothers me that these associate teams keep picking these aging ex-full member players, presumably on the logic that, he played Test cricket for the West Indies, so he must be good. But then, they've got Xavier Marshall in this squad, and Xavier Marshall's numbers for the USA are frankly abysmal. Like, they're even worse than his numbers for the West Indies, and you would think that playing at a lower level he'd be able to do better, but he's been worse. So I think the logic of picking ex-full member players thinking that they'll be good is pretty flawed a lot of the time. And obviously Ali Khan is he never really played much top-level cricket in Pakistan. He was discovered playing in Ohio. So I think, pick the guys that you've got, not these, just on their reputation or, just the fact that 10 years ago they played a test match. It doesn't make sense to me. And it's so frustrating to see. And there are under 19s USA players that have been picked. Peter Della Penna mentioned Vivek Narayan. But, he's off playing university cricket in the UK because he feels that's the best way to develop his game. But, what about all the other players in the USA who can't afford to do that or who are just playing in some random backwater league that no one's heard of, like Ali Khan was? Where are you looking for these guys? It's easy to pick a former Test player because they have name recognition, but it feels very much like they're sort of falling back towards the old ways.
And again, this is a point that I made when we talked about their aspirations for full membership before 2030, and I think the sky actually is the limit for USA cricket because there are enough people around, there are enough good players in the country that it's possible. It's just the issue is that the country is so vast. There are so many different leagues trying to do the same thing. Too many administrators probably trying to do the same thing. USA Cricket has a really tricky task, and I don't really envy them with it in that they've got to unite so many different people across so many different leagues to try and achieve what they want to achieve. And it's possible. We could easily see the USA become a strong, not only a strong associate member, but pushing on to do greater things in the next 5 to 10 years. But for it to happen, it's going to take an incredible number of people to make it happen. And we know it's been tricky for the USA. They got rolled for 35 against Nepal last year. They could not play spin, and that was well documented across everywhere. I hope for their sake that they managed to just find the 11. But again, 44 players there. They're going to have to crunch the numbers pretty hard and pretty quickly for that to all be achieved. A successful USA will go a long way to some successful associate cricket in the meantime, in the eyes of the world of international cricket. But it's going to take a lot of selection. It's going to take a lot of coaches to look at a lot of players. And it's just a really big project all up. So we will look at that with quite a deep interest because it is a very fascinating part of the world, and we know the troubles and the challenges that they have, whether they're self-inflicted or not, but we will keep an eye out for them moving forward. Some more, I suppose, off the field news, and we'll head to Africa now. Rwanda have a new women's coach, Nick Leonard Namburo, switching from Zimbabwe, and you made a point about this while looking into the career of Namburo. He's one of these coaches that are relatively new on the cricket scene in that they're not exactly ex-players who are played at the top level of international cricket and then going to coaching, but rather moving into coaching quite young and then developing that way. Talk us a little bit more about Leonard Namburo.
Yeah, he's played some sort of club cricket in Zimbabwe, but basically he has never played at any kind of top or even semi-professional level, which is interesting in itself. There aren't that many coaches who aren't ex-players, but he's done it the hard way. He's just moved up the ranks. He started off coaching, I think it was a couple of schools in Harare, and then got some club gigs and assistant gigs and that sort of thing. Did some work with the national team, coached Namibia to the qualifiers in 2019. And then, now he's moved off to Rwanda. So that's good to see for him that, there is a pathway for coaches who aren't professional cricketers and don't have that name recognition, because similar to the previous point that I made about, picking ex-full member players, but a lot of the time there's this kind of thought that, well, just because someone was a great player, well, they must be good at coaching, which isn't necessarily true. And, mentoring people and being able to help them fix their game and that sort of thing, that's a skill in itself, which is not necessarily the same as being able to play. So I think that's good for Namburo that he's able to make a career like this, and it's good for Rwanda as well, because their women's team is definitely on the up. They've been performing better and better at sort of African regional level, and I think it's good that they're taking the women's team seriously.
Yeah, definitely interested to see how this all goes, and you're quite right. Being an unbelievable player does not exactly translate to being a good coach or, other professions working inside of cricket, but not at a playing level. So we probably say the same thing about commentators as well. But for someone to actually specialize in the coaching ranks from a very young age and to kind of equip himself and to learn about the game in a way where he can impart his knowledge to other people. And I think it's probably a little bit easier to do perhaps on the women's side of things, but you never know. We could see something happen like this in international cricket and domestic cricket where people come more from coaching backgrounds. It happens definitely a lot more in other sports, and I think the dynamic between a coach and say a captain of a cricket team is much different in cricket in regards to other sports. I think we've made that point abundantly clear since this podcast began, and I'm sure other people share the same sentiment. But I will be, looking at this with a vested interest, knowing that, if I ever want my cricket coaching badges, there might be a pathway for myself and other people out there as well. But it's a great tool because, emerging cricket is dying for people to give more of their time and more of their knowledge to the game and give it back to the game as well. So stories like Namburo, it's really encouraging, I think, from an emerging cricket point of view, because they are coming from a full member. And yeah, I applaud this for, Namburo and for Rwanda as well. We know that, they're heavily involved in women's cricket. We saw the Kwabuka tournament in previous years that has such a powerful presence in the sporting and human life of people in Rwanda and parts of Africa as well. So looking forward to seeing how that goes. And again, we'll keep up with that from an emerging cricket point of view. Moving back to the Middle East and to the UAE specifically, where we've seen an independent anti-corruption tribunal find Mohammed Naveed and Shaiman Anwar guilty of 2 offences each under the ICC anti-corruption code following a hearing there. Naveed and Sharma were both guilty of Article 2.1.1 and 2.4.4. 2.1.1 for being party to an agreement or effort to fix or contrive or otherwise influence improperly the result, progress, conduct, or other aspects of a match at the T20 World Cup qualifier, as well as 2.4.4, failing to disclose to the ACU full details of any approaches. Mohammed Naveed was also guilty of breaking the Emirates Cricket Board anti-corruption code for the T10 League in 2019, again for those 2 articles for being party to an agreement or effort to contrive or otherwise influence improperly the result, progress, conduct, and other aspects of a match, and failing to disclose approaches to the anti-corruption unit. Again, another black spot on the game, and unfortunately in the emerging game, Nick. And again, UAE's been an area where it has happened on multiple occasions now, and we've also seen other players leave, I suppose, before they were able to find themselves guilty. There's been a couple of other players who have fled the country as well. So again, we don't know absolutely everything, but reading into these details, it's not a great look. It looks as if the anti-corruption unit has acted swiftly and diligently to everything that's been handed to them, and justice has been met eventually. But again, it comes at the detriment of the clean players, I suppose, from the UAE national team who have been affected by all this, not only at the qualifier, but beyond. We're still seeing the consequences of this affect the UAE national team.
Yeah, I mean, just from a fan perspective, it's such a shame. You know, Anwar was a great batsman. I saw him hit a century against Ireland in the 2015 World Cup. It was a fantastic innings. You know, he's a quality player.
Yeah, in Brisbane.
Yeah, it was a thriller, actually. I think Ireland just got home. Yeah, really, really tense chase. But yeah, such a shame. It's always really depressing to see this sort of news come out, and it does hit associate cricket perhaps harder. I mean, we don't know necessarily, but associate cricket is sort of uniquely vulnerable in that it is being broadcast, and these players are on TV and they have the opportunity to fix, but a lot of the time they're not particularly well paid, and so they're probably easy prey for fixers to try and corrupt them. I don't know what we do about that, because the only thing that really can I guess, as Tim likes to say, pastoral care is probably the ultimate answer of educating these players and giving them better opportunities as human beings to not take the easy cash. But yeah, it's just sad, and it's during a World Cup qualifier. The allegations that they were offering to fix matches during a World Cup qualifier. That's such a betrayal to their teammates. And imagine being a UAE player like Ahmed Raza, who picked up the pieces as captain after this all went down just before the tournament started. Knowing that these guys in your team were deliberately going to underperform and essentially sell out their teammates for their own profit. It's terrible. Looking at the reports come out, and you can read the sort of the public version of it, and there's some pretty damning quotes in there. Naveed's saying stuff like, "Bro, I'm the captain of the UAE. We can do anything." What does that tell you? That he's offering to just sell out his teammates? It's disgusting.
I think probably the best result in all of this is that UAE have carried on quite well without them, and it goes to show that if you're willing to do this for the sake of a few bob, then the game will leave you behind, as we've seen here. And a couple of UAE players, especially some of the young guys who have come through, have really taken the opportunity with both hands. And they're now on their path to their own, careers and international games. Mayapan, Vrida Aravind as well have been just 2 players who have had to come in, due to the extenuating circumstances, and they've performed admirably. So the game will leave you behind if you are bad to the game. The game doesn't owe you anything. And we've seen that here again, and you will be found out if you don't report your approaches to the ACU. And again, you guys spoke to Steve Richardson on the pod last year at some point, and he made that point, we will find you if you manage to try and do anything under the table. And again, another point that you brought up, Nick, and Peter Della Penna talked about it when Hamza Tariq of Canada was approached, that, associate cricketers now are going to find themselves in an interesting spot where there are more streams, there are more games that are accessible on the internet to watch, and as a result, people will gamble on them, and people will find opportunities to try and make contact with players playing in these games and make approaches. It just becomes a case of the ACU and other people involved in national boards around the world to sit down with their players and brief them on, what is an approach, what is sinister activity, how can you work out when someone, is grooming you or doing something sinister to try and get you to be involved in a fix. And again, Tim Cutler's favorite quote, pastoral care. It's so crucial in all of this. And to have these players wrapped almost in a cotton wool just to make sure that you are going to be away from all of this. But it is a pretty simple concept, and maybe the bubbles of COVID have kind of helped with this, where players are actually away from the general public. But it can be a simple case of just someone staying in the same hotel room as a certain player, someone going to a shopping center and meeting up with someone. It's tricky, but hopefully you would hope that these players understand and know what to do when that situation arises. I just hope that, if a player is to report an approach that's been made to them, that they have the subsequent protection if they were to kind of be put in that spot. Because I'm sure as a player, that's actually quite a tricky one as well. When you are approached and you are quite scared of the situation and you turn to someone and say, oh, I don't know what such and such is going to do to me if I find myself in this situation and I don't come through with X. So look, it's a tricky situation, and it's only going to happen more in associate cricket and with the advent of streaming too. But it does look like, the ACU and everyone involved in that are doing a fantastic job all the same. And again, you will be found out.
Yeah, and I would I definitely recommend that interview with Steve Richardson of the ACU, the anti-corruption unit, that we did last year. It's a very interesting sort of look into the inner workings of how they go about their job of trying to keep cricket safe from this sort of corruption. And to your point about people who might be worried about, will they get in trouble for reporting something, or if they got a bit sort of caught up or something, he does go into the, how that works, and they don't want to ping players, they want to give players the opportunity to do the right thing. And I think looking at this report, it's interesting because there's quite a few quotes from the players and some sort of WhatsApp screenshots and that sort of thing. But there's also some quotes from the interviews, and it's sort of interesting to see Richardson in action, I guess, as doing the interviews and see his approach to questioning the players. And he gives them every opportunity to tell the truth, and but some of the time they just
they don't.
Yeah, it's damning stuff. Yeah, they. There's another quote here, saying everyone is earning money, okay? Even Naveed is earning money in his previous league from other bookies, so why can't we? They know what they're doing, and they're choosing to do it, and yeah, you will get caught if you're doing that sort of thing.
And just to kind of tie a bow on all of this too, and reading into some of the work that a few cricketers' associations have done, FICA in particular, where leagues and teams within leagues have actually struggled to pay their own players. So I think point. A lot of, the responsibility on how these players are actually paid is on the shoulders of those who employ them as well. So that's another thing that really needs to be addressed as well once we do move forward, and that's not just an associate level thing with some of these T20 leagues. I've heard of very high-end international players playing in some of the top leagues around the world not paid properly for their services. So that would be a step in the right direction in terms of stamping some of this out, simply because, the players wouldn't even feel more inclined than they were already to partake in this sinister activity. But you would hope that that the good conscience in everyone would decide that it wasn't a path to go down. Finally, Nick, we need to talk about two associate players who played in the BBL. Unfortunately, didn't make the finals with quite a strong team, but not through the fault of their own. Tim David and Sandeep Lamichhane, of course, of Singapore and Nepal, respectively. Tim David with over 250 runs in the competition. Sandeep picked up a wicket every game, roughly 8 wickets in 8 matches, at an economy of 7.5. And looking at Tim David's numbers there at the end of their campaign, he had an average of over 30 and a strike rate over 150. I think there were only a handful of players in that same echelon, and those players were the likes of Chris Lynn, Ben Cutting, Alex Hales, Dan Christian, Daniel Sams. So he was very much in elite company, and look, I think it was quite a positive campaign for both of them. And to look at Hurricanes and their list for next season, I think they're probably two players that would probably safely say that they deserve to be on the team list next year. Sandeep maybe not as potent as he once was, especially in the first year at the Melbourne Stars, but you've got to say, definitely did not do themselves an injustice in that competition, particularly David, who looks to have gone from strength to strength.
Yeah, David's definitely, he had a very handy season. What I liked about him, he batted a bit lower than he typically does for Singapore, but he just came in and sort of boosted the run rate in that middle, lower order with not so many overs left to go. And he doesn't waste many deliveries, that's a big thing in T20. Either you get going or you don't. And players who sort of sit around and suck up deliveries and they often can cause problems. So the fact that David doesn't do that. He either comes off or he doesn't. That I think that's a good quality to have as a T20, especially sort of middle lower order batsman. Sandeep, I don't know what's happened. He didn't bowl badly, but he's just sort of waning a little bit. I don't know. I mean, he did get coronavirus, so we can probably cut him a little bit of slack. But you watch a lot more Big Bash than me. Is his lines off, or are they sort of working out him, seeing him out of the hand a bit better, or what do you think's going on?
To be honest, I think it's a case of the idea of, say, second year syndrome. I know this is his third season, but I think that his action and the analysis on him is probably a little bit more scrutinized by every other team in the competition, and they're probably looking at him as someone that they have to see off rather than someone to attack. I think we all know that in the first season, when a new player's on the block, say like a Tanvir Sangha from the Sydney Thunder, who bowls a little bit differently to Sandeep Lamichhane in that he throws the ball up and he bowls a wider line. He doesn't bowl as many wrong-uns, but I think a lot of people, especially earlier in the tournament, would have had a target on Tanvir Sangha's back and said, oh, this is a young guy, we need to get on top of him. He ended up taking a bunch of wickets early, and by the end of it, a lot of teams actually kind of played him a lot differently, shut up shop a little bit. I think Sandeep's in the same bracket. I think he bowls kind of a similar pace to Rashid Khan, a different action, but definitely whippy, definitely tricky to pick the ball out of his hand. And talking to a couple of people involved in, cricket at the high end, they actually said that it's very difficult to pick up the white ball in the evening when the ball is spinning out of the right hand or out of the left hand for a left-hand wrist spinner, of course. It's a little bit tricky to actually work out which way the ball's spinning because a lot of people use the seam almost as their bearing to see which way the ball is turning. And in the evening, it's just a little bit more difficult to pick up. Now, I don't know if it's just the scheduling, but I did notice that the Hurricanes, especially earlier in the competition, when Sandeep came in from New Year's Day, they actually played more afternoon games.
Interesting.
I don't know if that necessarily affected his numbers, but I think it was just a case of a lot of the opponents just turning around and say, look, this guy's he's their key spin threat. We just need to see him off and attack elsewhere, because at the start of the tournament, Hobart didn't really have a key spinner. It was probably the thing that they needed to add after Christmas to really make that finals push. Now, it was interesting that they didn't really pick Johan Botta. He was only really used as an X factor. They had a young kid, Will Parker, who got hit around a little bit, definitely a little bit too raw for BBL cricket. And then, Darcy Short actually had a good season with the ball. He bowled more overs this year. And then when Sandeep came in, it was a case of, let's see him out and attack the quick bowling. And then James Faulkner got injured for the Hurricanes, which I think was a big loss. And then it was a case of Meredith, Boland and Ellis, who are all quite similar. Meredith is probably a yard quicker than the pair of them. But I think a lot of teams did target those quick bowlers and just see Sandeep off. So I think there was nothing wrong particularly with how Sandeep bowled per se. It was just a case of, we can actually manufacture good totals against the Hobart Hurricanes, even if we let Sandeep take 1 for 24, 1 for 28, maybe 1 for 30 if we're lucky. And we'll back ourselves against the likes of Boland, Ellis and Meredith and that fifth bowler who normally was short to really go on and attack. So, I think it's another tick in the box for Sandeep just to prove his credentials once more. This isn't just a flash in the pan, one season wonder. He will be putting in performances like this over the next, 5 to 10 years. I can't see it changing too much. I think the only thing that will probably stop him now is that the game might change to a point where, middle order batsmen play leg spin a little bit better, and everyone overall from a leg spinning point of view gets found out. But then it will become a case of those guys reinventing again, because he's got a good wrong and he's got a good leg break. Players can't pick the wrong and still. Dan Christian just got completely comprehensively beaten in one of the dismissals in one of the later games for the Hurricanes. So again, I think this is another positive season for Sandeep and another step in the right direction.
Yeah. And just before we move on from the Big Bash, I think you mentioned Dan Christian in the comments there, but gee, what a season he's had. He's took 13 wickets and smashed a pile of runs at 180 strike rate. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's just something really just really reassuring about seeing Dan Christian. He's 38 now. He's just plugging away, hitting 30 off 20 every game, and 1 for 25, and he's just still going along. So good for him.
Oh, if only he had a passport and could play cricket in the associate. Well, could absolutely carve up. That's just about all the time that we have for this week. There are a couple of news bits and pieces to wrap up, though, to end the show. First, Canada's Nitish Kumar has signed on with the Leeward Islands Hurricanes in the West Indies Regional Super 50 Cup. The top order batsman was named in a 15-man roster with the Hurricanes' first game on February 7 against the Windward Islands. And Nepal all-rounder Pawan Saraf has struck a blazing 13-ball 50 in the Prime Minister Cup for the Police Club this week over there in Kathmandu in a win over Lumbini Province. Pawan hit 6 sixes and a 4 in his innings, with Sunil Dharmala also pushing for national team selection with a century opening the batting. The PM Cup reaches its climax this weekend with the Tribhuvan Army Club taking on the Armed Police Force Club in the final. Make sure to subscribe to the Emerging Cricket Podcast if you haven't done so already, so you can tune in as soon as it drops every week. Pass the pod around, and make sure to give us a 5-star review. If you want to support us financially, go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/emergingcricket, where you can support us from as little as $2 US a month. You'll get access to extended shows of a number of our podcasts, and you'll have a say on the show's direction. For now, on behalf of myself, Daniel Beswick, and Nick Skinner, see you next week.